Welcome to the Mindful Toolbox. I'm Sarah Lynn, an experienced classroom teacher, mindfulness coach, and emotional well-being practitioner. Every month, we offer webinars and podcasts that help support emotional and mental well-being. While these tips are great for everybody's mental and emotional health, we like to present them through the lens of children. A quick note, this audio has been taken from a video webinar training, so you're not going to be able to see all of the wonderful resources that we shared in video form. However, if you'd like to, be sure to head over to our website, betteryouth.co.uk/mindful/toolbox. See you there. So let's get started. Today, we're focusing on how to overcome overwhelm. I'm really looking forward to this session because in the next couple of weeks, many of our students are going to be preparing for mock exams. And overwhelm is a word that rolls off the tip of their tongue every single time we speak to them. So today, what are we diving into? We're going to look at what overwhelm is, how the brain responds to overwhelm, and I'm going to be sharing 4 plus an additional tip on how we can overcome it, as well as highlighting other healthy living habits that can assist in helping our overall mental well-being. And then we're going to dive deep into specifically handling performance anxiety. So, what is overwhelm? Merriam-Webster's dictionary makes it a verb. It means to upset or overthrow, to overcome, overpower, or submerge. These are really powerful words because in our mind's eye, we can truly imagine just the weight of the world pulling us down, keeping us below water, and maybe even crushing us underneath the house. What happens when we get overwhelmed? Clearly, it's not something that is enjoyable. So how do we experience it? And why is it important? When we experience overwhelm, the thinking brain gets hijacked. Now, let me go into that a little bit more. The brain itself is divided into many different compartments. In a previous session that we hosted here on the Mindful Toolbox called Better Communication, we dove into one of my favorite ways that we use to teach children about the brain. And it's called Flip the Lid. And it divides the brain into 3 main categories. We have the PFC, or the wise owl, at the front, so your prefrontal cortex, followed by the hippocampus, which is known as the elephant or the memory saver. And then last but not least, we have the amygdala, also known as the guard dog. We like to teach the brain this way because it demonstrates how the brain functions in a way that makes it easier to understand. So knowing that we have the PFC, the hippocampus, and the amygdala, we can then look at how we experience overwhelm. So when we are overwhelmed, we go into power saving mode. And this is because our PFC, so our prefrontal cortex, that's where our logical thinking happens, it knows that once we start to feel overwhelmed, there are going to be a lot of stimuli and ideas that we're going to have to sift through, which is going to take a lot of energy. But that prefrontal cortex also recognizes that in order for our body to run just normally, it also takes a lot of energy. So what happens is we go into a bit of a power saving mode. It actually stops the PFC from working. That wise owl shuts off. And instead of all of our logical thinking taking place, the amygdala, the guard dog, sends an alarm that releases different hormones like cortisol, which encourage our body, our physiological state, to go into a fight, flight, or freeze reaction. In power saving mode, this is also where you can feel lethargic, you can have brain fog, forgetfulness, you can experience blanking, especially in a test situation. You may become more irritable, and you may become really sleepy. So this typically is a result of when your prefrontal cortex is not working at its best because the amygdala, the guard dog, has sounded the alarm, alerted the body that there could be a potential threat, whether or not it is a mental and emotional threat or a physical one. Our brain can't always differentiate. So this is why being aware of our thought patterns is so important. But in power saving mode, we're not at our best. Once we start to feel like we're overwhelmed and we become aware of it, tend to go through two different routes in approaching overwhelm. The first is that we hide from it. The second is that we let it take over. Let's dive into them. Hiding from it. This is the first response that we have when we are responding to overwhelm. And what I mean by hiding, I mean by not acknowledging that you've allowed your amygdala, that guard dog, to take over and you're running everything through your emotional brain rather than the logical brain. When we hide from it, we're not performing at a level that we think we should. So we become frustrated, and therefore the stress increases. Because the stress increases, we're still working through the amygdala, through the fight, flight, freeze headspace, and our production continues to spiral down. The second option, or the second method of responding to overwhelm, is to identify with the feelings, to take them on. When this happens, we start to internalize the power saving mode. We start thinking, oh, I'm always forgetful. I don't have a good memory. I have baby brain, even if that child is now in school. We become so accustomed to feeling like we're in power saving mode, to feeling lethargic and to have brain fog. We become so used to it that we start to take those feelings on as being the norm, rather than them being a sign that we are not using our prefrontal cortex and that we are working only through a small portion of our brain. So now that we understand how the brain responds to overwhelm, how we as humans choose to cope when we acknowledge that we have overwhelm, let's discuss the 4 different ways that we can overcome it so we can get back to feeling more in control, empowered, calm, and safe. The first thing that must happen is we need to have awareness. The best action is prevention. And the best thing that we can do is to tune into how we feel through active mindfulness or active reflection, if you will. Being aware of what's going on internally is one of the best ways that we can acknowledge that there's shifts that may be on the horizon or that already are happening. Once we are aware, we're then in a position of taking back control. And one of the biggest concerns with overwhelm is that we don't have control because we are not living life or perceiving the world around us through a logical headspace. Instead, we're moving with our emotions. So once we take that awareness, we're also taking back that control. Number 2, how we can calm that amygdala. So one of the best things to understand is that our amygdala, or our guard dog, it can be soothed and we can slow that reaction down. It may not go away completely, but we can definitely learn how to acknowledge when it's about to go into fight or flight mode, and then use tools in order to soothe it, calm it, and regain that control. So a typical response would be to have a stimuli that triggers the amygdala, the guard dog. This turns off the PFC, prefrontal cortex, to save energy. It releases hormones for the fight, flight, or freeze response. The body then becomes engaged, and there's physiological responses like increased heart rate, dilated pupils, maybe even sweating palms. We start to feel ourselves thinking less logically, and we have heightened emotions. Overwhelm is when we can feel irritable, frustrated, angry, sad. However, once we know how to calm the amygdala, we can actually offer an off-ramp to our brain that will stop it from releasing those hormones and instead refocus back on the present moment. And one of the best ways that we can do that is to connect to our breath. When we're engaged, it's very difficult to switch ourselves off. So for myself, the best time to really encourage that off-ramp navigation is when you start to realize that you're being triggered. Once we engage in mindful breathing, you'll notice that your heart rate will slow. And when your heart rate comes back to normal, your PFC will not feel as triggered to shut itself down. The amygdala will no longer have to send out cortisol and other hormones to engage the fight, flight, or freeze reaction. And your PFC is likely to regain control. Number 3, now that you're in more of a calm state, we can become aware. Am I in immediate danger? If yes, then your fight, flight, or freeze reaction is warranted. If no, if it's thoughts that are assaulting you, then we need to find a way that we can address those thoughts so it doesn't trigger our brain. Can I identify the root cause? Is there something that has triggered me that maybe I can learn from and grow to understand so it becomes less of a trigger? And perhaps more pertinent to our students is understanding their own schedule. So is there an upcoming exam? Is there a lot of homework due? Am I going through relationship adversities? Knowing those things and being really aware through reflection will allow us to understand what's going on internally at a higher level. So level 4, there's 2 different options for level 4, which is why I said we have a 4+1 kind of approach to our method. If you are in a safe space and you have the time to reflect, 4A, risk analysis, is one of the best things that you can do to ensure that you are not going to go through a cycle of constantly being triggered by a similar situation. And when we analyze the risks of our thoughts, one of the most important questions is to ask ourselves, is the thought based on fact? Is it a real threat? Or am I hypothesizing or catastrophizing or fortune telling with no connection to fact? That would mean that you're working through anxiety. Once we can identify those thought patterns, then we could use other methods like cognitive behavior therapy to replace those thought patterns with ones that are grounded in logic and fact, which will help lower the emotional response. If you're not in a position to be able to analyze everything right now, but you do need to get yourself into a place where you can feel calm and relaxed, then 4B would be the place to go. 4B is through gratitude. It is the quickest way to reset the brain, because instead of focusing on the past which is depression, or the future, which is anxiety, gratitude forces us back into the present moment. And when we're in the present moment, if there are no immediate dangers around us, we can then allow ourselves to feel safe. And even the acknowledgement of the space around us or the people around us that are connected and supporting us through our journey can create its own emotional response and its own hormonal response that will actually stop the anxious, overwhelming, full body reaction to overwhelm. So gratitude is kind of like the easiest way that we can shift our mind's focus back to the present moment. Okay, so now that we understand the 4 different methods that we can use to overcome overwhelm, let's not forget that there are things that we can do to help our mental and emotional well-being every single day. And those are living a healthy life through exercise or regular movement, being in nature because it helps to create space for our mind, practicing mindfulness. I hope by now that you've seen that mindfulness is integral in being able to slow down our emotional response and provide our brain a little bit of space just to breathe and interpret so we're not kind of coming from that knee-jerk reaction. Another really good method is to write thoughts and feelings out. The act of pen to paper acts as a physical release of emotions and feelings and thoughts and worries and ideas. And then it doesn't feel like it needs to stay wrapped up in our mind anymore. And of course, sleep plays a huge, huge role along with planning for the future. If you're feeling overwhelmed a lot of time, it's because you feel like you don't have control. The best way to regain that control is to become aware that you're feeling overwhelmed, slow the process down, analyze if there's a way that you can take action, and then plan accordingly. Now that we kind of have a really good handle on overwhelm, I want to talk specifically about dealing with performance anxiety. There are 5 different things that I reckon can really support performance anxiety and that we use with the children that we coach through our Bettering Youth program. So Bettering Youth offers emotional well-being coaching and academic tutoring. And through the tutoring, we like to blend these 5 different techniques. So the first is to teach about the brain. Once we understand about the brain and how it works, we no longer feel original with our response, which actually is a good thing because it helps us to realize that nothing severely is wrong and that it's a normal response that we're going through. Then we increase the child's ability to work under time pressure. A lot of the anxiety or the overwhelm that's felt within an exam situation is whether or not you're going to have the time to finish the questions and express all of the ideas that you have. And so by practicing time pressure, we're increasing our ability to deal with it. The third thing that we like to blend into our emotional well-being and academic tutoring courses is mindfulness. Mindfulness is a practice in being present. It stops us from getting carried away by the chatter of the future and the pull from the past. Instead, it allows us to ground into the present moment, typically through using our breath. Another key topic is to do risk analysis. Like I mentioned, a lot of anxiety has to do with what will potentially happen in the future. So if we're able to analyze the worst possible outcome that we're thinking and assess whether or not that thought pattern is grounded in logic, or if it's catastrophizing or a little bit too big to even potentially become true, then it helps to put things back into perspective. And once things are in perspective, again, we can feel in control, because if the thought really is as big as we think it is, then we can make a plan to approach it effectively. One of the biggest thoughts that go through students' minds when they're going through exams is whether or not they're going to pass and what the outcome will be if they don't. One of the easiest ways that we can help lower that anxiety is to go through the worst possible scenarios. And then, number 5, prepare. This is one of the best ways to help children build their own intrinsic motivation. No one wants to study for an exam unless they understand why they're doing it. So through all 5 of these steps, we're supporting children in developing the resilience to prepare for those big exams that will happen within and beyond the classroom. Because as you can see, a lot of these 5 skills are reflected in the 4+1 methods of overcoming overwhelm that I've shared already. So I really hope that this was a great and useful exploration of how we can overcome overwhelm. I know that I've mentioned that there's an emotional response that we need to get away from in order to look at things logically. And I want to emphasize that an emotional response is neither fantastic or awful. It is. It just simply is. And once we can acknowledge that, a lot of times our emotions are a predisposition of what we're thinking, or a combination of what we're thinking, and that they will then affect our behaviors, we can then look to our emotions as guideposts and signs as to what could potentially be going on and how we can then help ourselves to better navigate the future. So if you would like to continue your journey with us and learning more about emotional well-being and how to support children's mental health, then I encourage you to continue following the Mindful Toolbox every month, the second Wednesday at 7:15 p.m. so you can find all of the tips and tools that we've discovered and created and tested for ourselves over the last 5 years of working with children and their families. Another place that you can go for more support and resources is betteringyouth.co.uk. This website, especially their blog, is filled with resources that cover topics from specific subjects, English, maths, exam prep, right through to emotional literacy, dealing with Sunday scaries, how to create a bedtime routine. So there's a really great array of resources also available for you there. My name is Sarah Lynn. I am so honored that you spent your time with me today, and I look forward to connecting with you again in the future. Take care.